Yes, I was that kid in the classroom. So what I love to talk about is the idea of creating School 2.0, the idea of really moving towards a more modern version of what school can be. And I'm really passionate about this idea for 3 reasons. The first and most powerful reason is up in the upper right-hand corner. Those are my 2 children. That's Theo is on the right with the glasses, and that's Jacob on the left in the Darwin t-shirt. You'd say everyone science high school, right? And I am watching both of my children beginning that process of experiencing school. And for Jacob's in 2nd grade. And I am watching him become schooly. And just out of curiosity, how many people in the room are parents? Awesome. How many, be honest now, how many of you have had this moment where you're either dropping your child off at school, the playground, or putting them on the bus in the morning, and you have that thought of, I really hope they don't screw them up too much today. And we're the educators. So that should tell us something. Jacob is he's my son, so I've already said I can't stand still. The Herculean effort it must take to, meanwhile it was really distracting to have 4 M&Ms in the front row. I just looked down and I was like, oh my God! They still would have put me on Ritalin today. It's really sad. And really, I was in this look like, God help the teacher who would have tried to convince my mother that I needed to be on Ritalin. That would have been the worst thing ever. But Jacob, the idea that he has to sit still for 7 hours and 4 minutes a day, I don't know how any teacher does that and gets him to run. He goes to a wonderful school district of Philadelphia public school. It's 2 blocks away from my school. The principal's a dear friend of mine. And we had to sit down, my wife and I had to sit down with his teacher, who is this amazing 30-year veteran, great pro, awesome teacher. But we had to sit down with her in October and say, I know that you've got some really rambunctious boys in the classroom this year, and I get that, but you're sending our son home crying every day because your threat to the boys is that you're going to take away recess. And that will kill our child. Worse, you won't get any learning from him from about 1 to 3 if he hasn't had a chance to run around. You know, and in schools all over our country, that's what we're doing to kids. He gets, and again, he's 7, he gets 20 minutes to run around a day. That's it. And worse is, you know, so in his conference last week, his 1st grade teacher, and again, so I'm, like I said, I'm good friends with this principal. I am kind of known in Philadelphia as being that guy. Now imagine you're a 27-year-old, you know, sort of 4th-year veteran teacher, and you've got me sitting across the small tables and small chairs at parent-teacher conferences, right? So I'm aware of this, and I try to be good. So we were in conferences, and she was talking about how she really struggles to get Jacob to write because his handwriting is so terrible. And I said, okay, I agree, so's mine. And I was that classic kid who got 11114 all through elementary school, you know, 4 in penmanship. And I said, yeah, no, I agree, and his handwriting takes him forever, but I said, he actually a pretty quick typer. Tell you what, I'll buy him a Chromebook. And you never have to worry about getting him to write ever again. And she said, well, that wouldn't really be fair, Mr. Lehmann, because the whole class wouldn't have it. So I said, great, I'll buy a class set. Great, thank you. Didn't happen. So, you know, so no, she didn't. So, you know, instead we sit there with the tortured process of having to handwrite stuff, and it's crazy, and, you know, for reasons that I can't figure out. Theo, so So I'm watching that process, and I'm watching Jacob. He said to us a while back, this kid was read to every morning. He is the child of two ridiculously overeducated English majors, and our house is wall-to-wall books. And when left to his own devices, he will sit down and read. But thanks to the 100-book challenge, right? Everybody, and those books, and I get early literacy, I get what they're trying to do, but how many times do you make a 5-year-old read the book that says, Johnny went to the store, Johnny went to the park, Johnny went to kill himself from boredom. So now if you ask Jake, he'll tell you he hates books. And that causes my wife and I extreme pain. And yet, he will read of his own accord. When you ask him about that, he will read. And what did we get him back with? 2 things. 1, Pokemon books. What are you going to do? I'll take it. And the second, this makes me happy, he loves Shel Silverstein. He will read Where the Sidewalk Ends and Light in the Attic and Falling Up until the cows come. He loves to play with words and language on that type of stuff. But he'll tell you he hates books. Because what we've introduced him to is this schooly nature of what books are, which is a way to teach you to read without ever falling in love with the story. What a horrible mistake to do to children. My younger son is word challenged. Theo is brilliant and creative and funny. This is a child who comes into our bedroom in the morning and wakes us up and knowing he'll make Daddy laugh by going, "Good morning, Governor." It's about the funniest thing in the world. It's on YouTube, I think, somewhere if you want to look it up. And he also has special needs. He is losing his eyesight. He won't lose it all, but he will lose a lot of it. He has some major issues. And none of that is to say all poor Theo, because he's amazing and wonderful and creative and smart and great. And has an IEP. And I never want a teacher to look at him and think, I have to get this kid to pass the test. So this is a very personal issue for me, that we've got to make better schools. That schools have got to be better than they are for our children. The second reason this is really important to me is all of you. Quick show of hands. This is this is my low-tech version of Poll Anywhere. How many of you think you're getting it 100% right for your kids in your schools? 90. 80. First hand. 2. 70. 60% right. Show of hands, who thinks they're getting it at least half right for your kids in your school? Guys, we're barely at half the room. Teachers all over this country, and by the way, every time I've ever done this experiment, no one has ever, I've never seen more than half the room raise their hands. Teachers all over this country know that something isn't as good as it used to be. They know that stuff isn't right. And yet, we struggle to figure out how to fix it. So that's the other reason this is incredibly important to me. The last reason is, of course, the real reason, right? The children we teach. That photo is a photo of the first class of the Science Fiction Academy. They graduated 2 years ago. If you ever want to be incredibly humbled, start a school. 120 families sent us their children when we were nothing but an idea. And they said, we trust you. And trust me, there is no one else in Philly talking about education the way we do. So the idea that they took this chance on us, to this day, I said at a graduation, I said, I said to the parents, I said, I can ask you all now, what were you thinking? But the thing is, I don't care if you are teaching in the most prestigious, most famous, most, esteemed school in the country, or you are teaching in a school that hasn't, got off the failure list in a bazillion years. Parents send us their children. They don't keep the good ones at home for somebody else to teach. They send us their kids. And that's got to humble us. We are all, again, All of you know that incredible leap of faith that you take every morning when you send your children off to school. And know that every child you interact with, their parents are doing the same. That's got to drive us to be better than you. So I'm going to cop to 3 biases in my speech today. The first one, and anybody know who that is? Who is it? Somebody just yell it out. John Dewey. How many people here, raise your hands if you've read John Dewey? Keep your hands up if you have read him since graduate school. I encourage you all, it's a short book. Pick up The School and Society or Democracy and Education and reread it. It is a more vibrant version of education than almost anything else you will read. Now, the hard part about Dewey and the hard part about his ideas is that, and just to give a quick version of those ideas, like for example, back in in the Chicago Lab School, the way that they taught chemistry to the kids was through food science. They had to make each other the meals. I want to talk about high-stakes exam, right? I mean, if you did it poorly, your friends ate badly. But think about all the chemistry and everything you can teach by teaching it through cooking. Don't you think that they remember it better than staring at the Zundal textbook? So the hard part about it, though, was this, which is that for the longest time, project-based learning, and knock on project-based learning was it took forever, you didn't get as much content in, and the projects were kind of, the project's only a parent could love. In 1975, in Camden, New Jersey, which is a very difficult place, my mom got a grant to get a handful of the old, I think they were Super 8 cameras. She gave them to kids in Camden, New Jersey, and they spent the summer making documentary films. We call it digital storytelling today. David Jakes did a wonderful keynote on it. But she got these kids who've never been asked to tell their stories before to tell their stories on film. The problem was it took all summer long. When, they had to hand cut all the edits. And what you ended up with looked like it was made by a bunch of kids. And it was easy to dismiss and hard to pull into the curriculum because of all of those reasons. Today, with a laptop and a cell phone, kids can tell their stories and create powerful, unbelievable artifacts of their own learning in ways that do include. My second bias is, and with all due respect to the assistant superintendent, this isn't about what jobs the kids are going to have. How many people in the room can tell me what jobs the kids who are in 3rd grade are going to have by the time they graduate college? Okay, because if somebody raised their hand, we would have to talk. We don't know the world our kids will inherit. I go into my children's room at night, I stare at them as they sleep, and I think, oh, believe me something. Hope the world isn't going to go down a path that I don't like. We don't know what jobs what skills they will need for the jobs. We know that, however, they're going to face some incredible challenges. And we know we have to prepare them for those challenges, not just for the workforce, but for citizenry. If we shoot for workforce, if all we're shooting for in public education is workforce development, that's all we will get. But if we shoot for citizenry, we will get the scholars, the neighbors, the politicians, the parents, the activists, the citizens that we need. And to me, that's a higher goal. I think if you shoot for citizenry, you'll get workforce. But if you shoot for workforce, that's all you'll ever get. And the last bias I have is I believe deeply that public education in this country is the cornerstone of the American democratic experiment. And I think public education is on life support. And it worries me a lot. And I think that there's a lot of external reasons for that. But I think our job as the educators is to figure out how we are going to reinvigorate what we do so that way we've got the counter-argument to those who tear us down. At the end of the day, what I'm talking about here is not just student agency, but agency for all of us. The idea that we have to be active agents in our lives and in our schools, and that our children must be as well. What are the pieces that make up agency? Talk about 3 things. Four things, excuse me. The first is head. We've got to help them become critical thinkers. Anything else doesn't matter. If they cannot parse these ideas, if they cannot take them apart, if they do not have the ability to be full of thought and critically pull those ideas around and do interesting things with them, we've got to teach them to speak from the heart. The world of logic has taken us as far as it's going to go. Logic, when mixed with compassion, is better, and our schools should teach that. We've got to teach them to use their hands. They've got to be able to do things. It's not enough. Again, aside from your certification exams to become the teacher, you haven't had to sit and answer a test in a long, long time. You are judged by the work that you do with your head, heart, and hands, and then we must teach children to have voice. The world right now that we live in is being decided on by fewer and fewer people with louder and louder voices. We must give our children voice. We must teach them to be active agents in the world. We must teach them that their voice matters. And the first place we do that is by making it matter to us. Here's the problem, right? This is our current model. It's the factory model of education. It educated a nation. It didn't suck. Let's go ahead and say that. Yay us. The American public school of the 20th century did a pretty amazing thing. More children graduate, and before we, let's contextualize some of the stats that are out there right now. Before we throw everything that we do under the bus, let's be aware of this. More children graduated from high school last year than ever before in American history. Not just by sheer numbers of population growth, but by percentage. More children are in college today than ever before. More children are graduating from college than ever before. So, before we say everything's broken, let's also acknowledge that what we've done so far, we stand on the shoulders of some pretty amazing people. But the problem is that the mill that we're on right now feels wrong. What are the big influences on school design from a physical standpoint? Anybody know two of the biggest influences on school design from a facility standpoint? What? Well, right, but what are the other, yes, cost, obviously, I'm sorry. What are the other sectors of society that influence the way schools look? Prisons and factories, right? Trung Lee, who's a brilliant school designer, who wrote a book called The Third Teacher, which I really recommend. It's an amazing read. Talks about the fact that in most schools, between a quarter and a third of the real estate, of the actual square footage, is in use less than 7% of the day. Anybody know what part he's talking about? Not the gym. Who said it? The halls. Right? Because of prison design. Right? I mean, think about it. The buzzer goes off, everybody leaves their cells, they go to whatever the next cell they're supposed to be in, and we lock the doors behind them. I've seen prison movies, that looks a lot like that, right? So many inappropriate jokes I'm not going to make right now. The 16-year-old boy in me is strong. Why not open the doors? Why not let them work in the halls? Why not let them sprawl? But more importantly, ask yourself and ask her, what do you need? How do I help? Get involved. Because a leader without any followers is someone out on the walk. And Pam deserves to be followed. She deserves, and she would argue if she was here, she doesn't want followers, she wants co-leaders, and so let me make that plug for her also. But follow her on Twitter, shoot her an email, she's the most accessible human being I've ever met, and say, how do we help? How do we get this to the legislature? How do we amplify the message? The people are out there, and again, she got the other superintendents to sign on. This isn't just Pam. It's an official document from the VA, at the ASS. She needs your help. Right? If we're going to argue for something different, if we're going to argue that we don't like the status quo, we better have another message, and we better have another message. is one of the problems I have in public education today. I think there is a profound lack of humility in the work that we do, and especially in the work of policymakers, and I hold Bill Gates personally responsible for this. I do. I'm going to tell you a quick story about Mr. Gates. He came to our school, and he gave a speech, and he proved himself to be exactly who he is, which is one of the great patricians of our age. In a speech to SLA, now Science Leadership Academies, demographics, we are 65% children of color. We are 50% high economic need. And to that audience, he looked out and said, you know, there's a real problem in education in Philadelphia. There's a 50% dropout rate in this city. I've driven around Philadelphia. I don't know where they're hiding all these dropouts. I don't know where they are. And he admitted to his chief of staff later that he didn't think the kids got the joke. What he didn't understand is that what we were really thinking was F you, Mr. Gates. Because those dropouts are our parents. They're our neighbors. They're our brothers and sisters. And where are they? They're working for a living. And how dare you think that dropping out of high school is a death sentence? And how dare you think that you have the right to talk down to us? That you know what's best? I feel pretty strongly about this, isn't it? And literally, the idea that we thought we just didn't get the joke. This is the same guy who in the same speech was talking about how those of us with more need to do for those who have less. And I agree with that. Except this was right after the Haiti earthquake. And he talks about how we need to rebuild Haiti. And then he says, not that Haiti was all that great before the earthquake. Never stopping to think that a room full of black and brown children might have some children from Haiti. Again, we just didn't get the joke, Mr. Gates. Let us remember to be humble. Let us remember to honor the unbelievable diversity of experiences and lives that we have in front of us. Let us realize how difficult it is to educate a nation. And let us call out everyone, regardless of their status, regardless of their position of power, who would dare to think that they know all they need to know about how to teach children. But let's also hold ourselves to the same standards. We have to be better. How many of you have ever had the experience where you worked hard for a child and couldn't figure out why they couldn't pass your class? I have. I've been to houses, I've gone, I've sat with kids, I've done everything I could, and I've seen them drop out. SLA does not have a 100% graduation rate. I wish we did. It's pretty high. We have a 99 point in the 3 years now that we will have had schools. We've had 2 kids drop out. I know their names. I know their stories. And I know everything we did for them. And I know that we failed. I know that we couldn't figure it out for them. We couldn't help them through. And that drives me. Because as much as I love our school, and as much as I'm incredibly proud of the fact that I really do believe that the children have ever having been with us, I don't believe we've figured it all out. So, and one of the things I think we need to understand about our own profession is that we do stand on the shoulders of giants, and it is up to us to know our history. To that end, I hate people who read off their slides, but I'm going to do it for this one moment. Mostly because I just can't memorize this, I've tried. Angelo Patry says this: what the school system needs to understand is that its strength lies not in the strength of the central organization, but in the strength of the individual school, not in making one school like another, but in making each school a distinct unit. The need of the system is the preservation of its units, so that each school can keep itself alive, wide awake, responsive to its people, easily adaptable, the best of its kind. How many people want to work for Angelo Patry? Me too. You can't. He's gay. The cool thing is, though, he wrote these words in the 19-teens in a book called Schoolmaster of the Great City. Angelo Patry was a neighborhood principal in the South Bronx, in the same neighborhood where about 90 years later, Jonathan Kozol would write Amazing Grace, same neighborhood. And in 1915, Angelo Patry was bringing in doctors and lawyers and social workers and gardeners to his school, making a true community school, to teach the children of attendance in the South Bronx. 100 years later, Jeffrey Canada starts the Harlem Children's Zone not a mile away from where Patrick did his work. And this is no way to denigrate what Jeffrey Canada is doing. I think his work is unbelievable. But the sad thing is that we treated it as if he was the first one ever to think of it. And for the record, Canada knows he stands on the shoulders of giants. He knows others have come before. It is our job to know who has come before us. It is our job to learn the lessons of the past and be better tomorrow. How are we going to do that? I think we've got to reclaim our language if we're going to reclaim education. This is where the old English teacher in me comes out. I believe language matters. So the first thing, how many people have heard the phrase deliver instruction? Show of hands if you've heard it. Yeah. Anybody tell me what it means? I really don't know. It's as if, to me, you deliver pizza. You don't deliver instruction. We teach. When did that become a dirty word? We teach. Instruction is not a thing that we can deliver. It's not like UPS can be like, hi, your instruction's here. There you are. Thank you. And it's a dangerous word, though, because it's a dangerous phrase, because it is insidious. If we don't think about that, if we use that phrase, that is implying that there is some sort of mythical instruction that if we just could figure out how to deliver it properly, all children would learn. Let's remember that we teach. The second thing I think we've got to remember is that there is a profound difference between education and training. And this gets to the heart of that idea of workforce development versus citizenry. You can probably train a workforce, but you can't educate a populace. Let's remember not to talk about training our children. Let's talk about educating them and making sure that everything we do is based on the middle way. I also think as educational technologists, we got to dream bigger than this. If the coolest thing that we can imagine with all of these really nifty tools at our disposal is the latest and greatest film strip, is a better standardized test, then the failure of our imagination will be the failure of the nation. Let us remember that these tools are not meant merely to divide, sort, sift, and measure. These tools were meant to create. And let's use them to the best of their ability. To that end, Alvin Toffler talks about the idea that the illiterate of the 21st century will not be those who cannot read and write, but those who cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn. To prove that point, that darkly lit slide behind his quote is from the Slide Rule Museum. Is there anybody in the room who will come to being old enough to have learned math from the slide rule? When was the last time you used it? And I have this picture in my head of the last slide rule teacher. She's a wonderful teacher. I am sure she was the best slide rule teacher there ever was. She's this little old lady near the end of her career. She thinks calculators are the devil. She's holding onto that slide rule. They will pry it out of her cold, dead hands. But the problem is this. That slide rule math teaching, as awesome as it was for her, was about her. It was about what she was good at. It was about what she did well. It was no longer about what the kids needed. We have to be willing to unlearn it as well. And to prove that point, I will mock myself. Who can tell me what's behind the quote on this slide? HTML, right? Man, I was good at HTML. I started my teaching career in the early 90s. And I was teaching English, and I was teaching cyber mentoring, and I was teaching kids to publish their essays online I was teaching them Pico and reading email on time, and I used to get into the great VI, Emacs, Pico wars. I just really dated myself, and y'all were like, oh wow, he is a geek. And I thought that every child needed to learn HTML. Everybody had to learn HTML. If you were going to be able to publish to the world, we all needed HTML. Except that became obsolete, or at least that statement became untrue the day that you could do save as a web page on Microsoft. And for 2 years after that, I kept teaching every child HTML because, damn it, you needed it. But really, it was because that was about me. I was the only one in my building who could do it. Look how cool I am. I get to go to conferences and present. Here's how to teach children in TML in English class. It was no longer about them. I had to unlearn the thing that had made me cool, the thing that had given me cachet, the thing that had put me on my first time speaking in front of a crowd of people that were over the age of 18. What are you willing to unlearn? What are the sacred cows that are in your classroom? The way you teach, the way you grade, your policies, the way they sit. What are the sacred cows that are more about your comfort zone than what kids need? Wow. There. Let's also remember this. We learn best when it matters to us. How many people have had a moment like this in the last year of your life, where you were in the midst of doing something and you were learning something new and you felt your brain, really kind of smoke coming out your ears for a moment, and then something happened. The phone rang, your husband or wife called you, your child came into the room, and you were broken out of that learning reverie, and you looked down at your cell phone or your watch, and you realized more time had passed than you thought. Show of hands, who's had that moment in the last year? How many people think we set up school to let kids have those moments? Right? The average high school class time in America is something around 45 minutes. You have time to get them in their seats, you have time to collect the homework, give the quiz, put the do now on the board, talk for 5 minutes, let them talk to each other for 5 minutes before the bell rings again, you give them your summation, give them the homework, and get them home. It's a great way to convince ourselves that we're working really hard. And it's a great way to sort of churn through. And if you've ever taught on the block, you know that it's true that when you have block scheduling and you have a really bad day in class, you fail long and you fail hard. And you wish for the 45-minute class where you could just tap dance for long enough to get the kids on to their next classroom. But that doesn't mean that it's good for kids. Because, and again, I love that it's John Cleese of Monty Python's name that said this best: if you want creative workers, give them enough time to play. And to prove this point, this is a photo from the MIT Media Lab, and it's a little bit too dark. You can't see what the sign in the middle right-hand corner says. But the MIT Media Lab, one of their slogans is lifelong kindergarten. And not the kind of kindergarten Jacob went to, Johnny goes to the store. No! These are the smartest people in the world. I've had the opportunity to go up there and spend some time with them. They are doing things that will revolutionize the way we live. They have every right to be obnoxious, cynical jerks. They're smarter than we are. And they remain with a sense of humility and awe and wonder and openness to the world that should exist in every classroom in America, in the world, in Virginia. So how are we going to get there? I think the first thing we've got to do is we've got to tell a better story. We have to have a bigger vision than what we have today. I stole this picture off Creative Commons off of Flickr, and at the time, the person actually since changed their caption of it, but the caption of it said, "Look at my shiny new classroom." Well, the desk legs are blue. That's new. That counts as innovation, I suppose. David Warlick tells the story better than I do, where he talks about the idea that Rip Van Winkle could have fallen asleep 100 years ago, woken up today, been completely bewildered by the society that he found until he got to a school. And then he would walk in and go, well, the blackboards are white now, but other than that, this makes a lot of sense to me. How are we going to do it? And by the way, everything I'm about to tell you, everything I'm about to mention, there are unbelievable systems and structures in place to make these things happen. These aren't just words on a page. They are the way we live, and they are the way that we structure our school. And I will be talking about them in some of the other sessions I'm doing today. So if you're like, yeah, how do you do that? I will happily deconstruct anything that you hear later on today or at lunch or stopping in the hall or whatever. The first thing we got to do is we've got to understand that the first thing we do is care for children. How many people are still classroom teachers right now? Raise your hand. What do you teach? You're all wrong. What do you teach? You teach kids. That's right. You teach children. If you take nothing else away from this speech, please change your language. And I mean this deeply. There is a profound difference. To me, the ball game is in this one. The difference between a nation of educators who say, I teach kids English, I teach kids science, I teach kids computers and technology, And I teach science, I teach English, I teach math. That's the win. If we do nothing else other than change our language, and we all do it together, we will move ourselves closer to the schools we need to be. We teach kids. Never let a child be the implied object of their own education. Never let technology stop you from thinking speech everywhere. The next thing I think schools need to be is I think they need to be inquiry-driven. There is nothing better than teaching kids to ask deep, powerful questions and then teaching them how to seek out and find answers that matter to them. I have a dream of a school that I want to start one of these days, which is, I have a dream that the first thing that the kids would do every morning is come in and on some sort of iPad device, some sort of tablet device, they would read the New York Times together as a school. And the reason it has to be on a pad is because I want some Kindle-style software where they can annotate what they read and ask deep questions. And then at the end of that hour, we would have that aggregated, so either both on their tablets or also on some big screens, because that'd be kind of cool. They can see who asked all the same kinds of questions they did of what kind of the different articles. And then they would spend that day researching their answers. And their days would be spent with some sort of combination of long-term inquiry projects that had stemmed from these things that they couldn't answer in a day, and answering the kinds of questions they had in a day. And then some sort of gallery share out, digital and hands-on and and physical. And I think if the kids did that for 4 years of high school, that would be a better school than 99% of the schools in America today. I really do. I think anything they didn't teach, they didn't learn in those 4 years, they would know how to learn when they left us. And they would have a profound understanding that the way to be an engaged and involved citizen is to learn and to be active and to do stuff with the things you learn. Inquiry is, to me, is the heart of what we need to do. With that inquiry comes the idea of student-centered learning. It is not about us. This is fine because I got you for an hour. But if I had you for 180 days, you'd never hear me talk this much in a row ever. That being said, I think teachers are more important than ever. I think those folks who would say, all we got to do is stick the kids in a computer lab, put them online, and they can learn everything they need to learn. All we need is Khan Academy for a nation. Really? Really? Have you met a child recently? Anyone who says that is such a deep misunderstanding of what it is to be a teenager, what it is to be a child in America today. Michael Bloomberg, and this is, again, the height of arrogance. Michael Bloomberg last week in a speech at MIT said that he would fire half the teachers in New York City because a teacher in a classroom full of 70 kids, a great teacher with 70 kids is better than a good teacher with 34, or a bad teacher with 34. Now, my first statement is, really, Mr. Bloomberg, do you really think that those of us who consider ourselves good teachers are excited about the idea of having 350 kids on our academic course load? Because I really want to go home and grade 350 projects. I'd like to be a father and a husband at some point in my life. But number two, Mr. Bloomberg, you sent your daughters to Spence. There's 12 children per class in Spence. Why is it that for a privileged education, you think that teachers matter, but for the rest of us, those of us in public school, you would advocate for a colonial education? How dare you? Teachers matter. We make a difference in a child's life. Never forget that. I also think schools need to be community-based, and I think this is where technology plays a huge role. It used to be, when I was growing up, when we were growing up, parents came for a basketball game, they showed up for parent-teacher conferences once or twice a year, and beyond that, school was a black box. Right? Kids are very good at, what did you do in school today? Nothing. We can make our schools transparent. We can make the walls of our school, the walls of our schools can be a memory. We can learn from many. How many of you teach us, how many people are English teachers or early grade literacy teachers? Do you teach a book that has a living author? Have you tried to Skype them in yet? Why not? Call the publisher. Hey, is Mo Willems around this week? We would love to grab him for 10 minutes. Why not? Bring the world to your classroom. I met a child Saturday who was doing a project. It's not an SLA kid. This is a kid. He was doing a project for National History Day in his middle school. And he was doing a documentary on Jonas Salk. So he Googled Jonas Salk and found the office number, I swear to God this kid did this, of Jonas Salk's son, who is now a doctor. And he called, in 6th grade, he called Jonas Salk's son and said, "Hi, my name's Devante. I'm doing a project on your dad. Do you have a few minutes for me?" And I watched the interview. He did a Skype recording of the interview. He put the interview into the documentary. He's got it's brilliant. It's awesome. No one told him to do it. He just thought, what a good idea. But why is it that is so, and we're all like, oh my God, that's brilliant. Why aren't we helping kids do that more? Why don't we understand that we don't have to be the arbiters of all information in our classroom? If you're doing a project in a science classroom on geology, call the geology professor, see if they'll spend half an hour with your class. They don't have to drive there anymore. And we don't need internet too for video conferencing. Skype them in. It's easy now. I also think that collaboration works. I think that my ideas are better for interacting with your ideas and being changed by them. Schools are the last places where we say to kids, if you learned it from somebody else, it must be wrong. Why do we do that? Put them in teams, put them in groups, let them learn from each other, let them synthesize what they know, and then let them show you what they can do. I also believe that schools need to be places of great passion. One of the things we love to say at SLA is high school should not just be preparation for real life, high school should be real life. Great project. This is an awesome photo. This is our children entered in their engineering classes. They entered a kinetic sculpture contest. Think about that one for a minute, kinetic sculpture. Right. So what they had to do is they had to build kinetic sculptures and then race them. They didn't do this against other high school kids. They did this against other artists and engineers and hobbyists and whatever, and this was this huge citywide race that happened in New York and Kensington, and you can see people behind them in the masks. Those were adults they're racing against. And our kids did it, and they loved it, and it was real. Another group of our kids, last 2 years ago now, in 10th grade, when they're learning about the water cycle and learning about all the chemicals and the chemical stuff, and biochemistry class, chemical stuff, that's the technical term for it, but Lehmann, you can tell I was an English teacher. So sad. They went out and did soil and water samples all over our city, and then put it on a Google map on where they found all kinds of pollutants and da-da-da-da. And one group found that upstream and downstream of the construction site, the levels of chemicals in the soil and water were vastly different. And so they called their local office at the EPA, and they reported their findings, and they got the local EPA compliance officer to come out and hear their presentation. And I'm sure the EPA compliance officer was like, there, that's lovely. I'm sure that's what they were expecting. Except that our kids' data worked. And the EPA agents saw what they did and actually had to go out, redo the study, replicate what our kids did, find out that our kids were right. And they all issued a stop action on the construction site and said, you clean up your act or you can't build another thing. High school kids doing real work that matters. That's what our schools should be about every day. When that happens, the energy and passion and joy with which kids will do that work is unbelievable. I also think the day's got to make a whole lot more sense. We can use all kinds of incredible tools like shared language, essential question, grade-wide themes, shared rubrics, to make the day make more sense. Classes should not be silos, they should be lenses to view the world. In 9th grade at SLA, when they're studying the big idea question of identity, they're reading Hamlet. In their English classes, they're studying genetics and biochemistry. They're studying African American history and learning the history of a nation. Classes can be lenses, not silos. Because at the end of the day, what we're really trying to teach is teach kids to be aware of their own, the way that they think and learn. It's about metacognition. All of this leads to schools that are understanding-driven and project-based. Kids who have the concepts of big ideas, the individual facts and figures, not that important. It doesn't matter whether or not you can remember what year the Magna Carta was signed in, but you better have an understanding of how we got to the notion of democratic society. Big ideas that matter. So what does that look like? In a traditional classroom, by the way, how many people in this room say that they are engaged in project-based learning? Not that many. Interesting. Yeah. I have a litmus test question for project-based learning. You say you do project-based learning. My litmus test question is this: at the end of the unit, when you really want to know what the children have learned, what is your assessment do? If your answer is I give a test, that's not project-based learning. That's test-based learning, with projects along the way to keep the children occupied. That's fine, that's what this looks like, but call it what it is. Project-based learning is when the work of the kid's own head, heart, hands, and voice is the most important work that you do. By the way, you might give a quiz along the way in a project-based classroom, dipstick to see whether or not a discrete skill has been learned. Sure. But then say if they can apply it, if they can transfer it, if they can build it, they can make it theirs. By the way, if you give out a project and you get back 30 of the exact same thing, you did not give out a project. You gave out a recipe, and there's a difference. So that all of this builds to the common language teaching and learning that we have at SLA. And I'm going to start to go through stuff really quickly because I'm sure I'm running short on time. How do we get there at SLA? First, we have common inputs. Every single class at SLA is built on our 5 core values. Inquiry, what are the questions we can ask? Research, how do we find the answers to those questions? Collaboration, how do we work together to make those answers deeper, richer, better? Presentation, how do we show what we know? And reflection, how do we step back and learn from what we've done? We have a common process. Everybody at SLA uses understanding by design to plan their units. Is UBD the greatest thing ever? Maybe, maybe not. There's probably other ones that are every bit as good. But the fact that we all use it together means that common language means when we sit down as a faculty to talk about curriculum, to talk about interdisciplinarity, to talk about all these things, we have shared language. That's powerful. The last thing, and this is kind of incredible, we have a shared rubric. For every single major project that is done at SLA, you are rated on 5 categories. The design of the project, the knowledge display, the application of the knowledge, the presentation of the project, and the process we follow. You want to see something really funny? Watch a staff of 25 people who agree on 99% of everything, agree on 5 words for every single project. My favorite moment of the planning committee was when Gamal Sharif, this was many, many years ago now, in a planning session, was so frustrated. We had post-boarded everywhere. We've been over this for 2 days. And he finally said to nouns, verbs, adjectives. I don't even think we're agreeing on a part of speech yet. Come on! But we got there. And every now and then a new teacher says, maybe we should revisit the rubric. We're all like, no. We do revisit it. You shouldn't calcify. But that common inputs, common process, and common language means that kids don't get lost in the space between adults at SLA. When you all speak the same language, when you all work towards the same thing, I think it is amazing to make kids ever learn. Because in most schools, you go from one teacher to the next, and everything that they say is different. You spend all your time just trying to figure out what the teacher wants as opposed to what to learn. Lower the bar for them to understand us, and you raise the bar for what they need. Now, this is a tech conference, and I haven't really mentioned tech all that. I think technology needs to be like oxygen. Ubiquitous, necessary, and invisible. It's got to be everywhere. It's got to be part of everything we do. And then we have to stop talking about it quite so much. The woman on the row right now who's taking notes on her iPad is not engaged in an iPad project. She's just working the way she needs. And yet every time we tell kids to pull out a computer or a laptop or a device, we call it a technology project. When was the last time you took children to a pencil lab? There was a great moment in school the other day. We had a visitor, we have a lot of visitors. I was walking a visitor around, and we stumbled upon student presentations in one of the classrooms. The kid was presenting a present. And the visitor pulled the teacher aside and said, oh my goodness, when did you teach the child the present? When did you teach the kid the present? And the teacher said, I don't know, I can't do that. And the visitor was like, well then how did they learn it? And the teacher said, I don't know. I showed them like 15 different examples of ways they could do stuff, and then I said, here's the project, figure out how you're going to present it in a way that makes sense for you. And some of the kids wanted to learn present. That's, it was not about a present project. Who cares whether or not 30 kids can do present? What we cared about was that the kids had an idea. They could present what they had learned in powerful ways, and they found the tools that made sense for them. And yet I will now problematize that very last thing I said. What we also have to understand, though, is that technology does change schools pretty profoundly. Neil Postman, in his book Technopoly, writes about the idea that certain technologies are not additive, they are transformative. His example is the Gutenberg printing press. That when the Gutenberg printing press really started to penetrate Europe, you didn't have the same Europe you always had, plus some books. You had a truly transformed Europe. In too many schools in our country, We have the schools we've always had, plus some tools. What we should have is truly transformed schools. We should be rethinking the way we do education in all new ways. And I'll tell you, the virtual schools movement does scare me. I think, online learning can be amazing. I think blended learning is awesome. But I think if all we do is say, hey, we've always had these classrooms, now we can have the exact same pedagogy we've always had, although we'll put it online, and the kids never ever have to see their adults, and they never have to leave the house, we're headed down a very scary path. Let us not recreate the worst of what we have always done with shiny new tools. Again, like I said earlier, the biggest thing that we can imagine is the latest and greatest film strip. Then we have deeply failed, and our lack of imagination will be astounding. Let's also remember this, and this is for us, this is our lesson for the geeks in the room. I don't care, on some level, what the latest and greatest and shiniest tool is. And I say that, and yet I am coveting my 4S. I don't have it yet. I miss Siri. All I have is a 4. Something's wrong in my life. But let us also remember that sometimes asking what's good is every bit as important as asking what's new. Chasing every last, latest and greatest tool will burn out those that we have to teach how to use the tools at all. That's not to say don't follow the shiny, because I would be the biggest hypocrite in the world if I said don't follow the shiny, because I love the shiny. But let's be intentional about the way we introduce them to everybody else we have. And let's remember what the point of technology really is. It's not about being able to give quizzes faster and get the results faster. The point of technology is to transform the way we create, research, collaborate, present, and network, and yes, learn together in our schools. Because at the end of the day, I don't believe that parents, when we say, what do you want for your child from school, I don't think what they really want is the highest grade on the test. I think they want us to help their children become more thoughtful, wise, passionate, and kind. These are the children, these are the citizens, these are the activists, these are the people that our society is going to be. So how are we going to get there? First is let's realize just how hard that is. Again, I know I've hammered at this humility piece more than once today, but I really do believe it. Let us be humbled by the enormity of the task in front of us, and let us be deeply, deeply skeptical of anybody who is not. This job is hard. Transforming the way we teach a nation is hard, and we don't have all the answers. Let us remember that. Let us undertake the task with humility. Let us also organize. I am the son of a teacher and a union lawyer. I make sense. And I'm not just talking about the unions now. I'm talking about principals and teachers and superintendents and parents and students standing together, demanding better. We have been silent too long. We have let the SOLs happen to us. We have let the funding cuts happen to us. And it is time for us to say, we will take no more. Not because teaching is hard, not because teachers deserve more, but because children deserve more. And when we say that, we make common cause with the principals, we make common cause with the superintendents, we make common cause with the parents. And we come together as a nation and say, we demand better. When we do that, we have to understand that our ideas must live in practice. This can't just be a mission statement. This can't just be flowery language on a lesson, on a web page. If you believe these things, then every system and structure that you have in your classroom, in your school, in your district, must latch to these beliefs. Ideas must live in practice. Tell me you want lifelong learning for your children. When do you teach that in your schools? You tell me you teach the whole child. When do you schedule care into your day? And understand this as technologists. We have a choice. Control or support. You won't do both. This is a photo of our kids dancing in the streets at SLM. A teacher came to me with an idea. He said, there's this dance organization in school, they're called in the city, they're called the Leah Stein Dance Company. They want to work with us. They're going to do location-based dance, teaching kids narrative through location-based dance. We're going to go into our city, we're going to go all over the neighborhood, we're going to find really cool places that kind of could tell a story. We're going to tell the stories, and then we're going to tell them through interpretive dance. And I'm going to get the whole 10th grade to do that. Every administrator instinct in my brain, in my sort of, said, like the scared part of the monkey brain that exists in every principal's head said, don't do it. No, 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 are you crazy? And I asked him a bajillion questions. I made him justify this pedagogically for ever. I came back at him a million times because I did not want him to do this, and finally he justified everything, and I said, you know what? This is all within everything we do. I can't control this. I've just got to support it, and thank God I didn't make that mistake because it's beautiful. Alumni come back. They come back on this day and they watch. Elementary schools are bringing their kids to watch these 10th graders dance. I mean, 10th grade boys, right? Doing that. And had I listened to the baser instincts of my nature, I would have never let him. Let's also keep asking questions and never settle for easy answers. The complexity of what we're doing is incredibly important. And for those of you who are thinking, how do you put this all together? There is one question that is the link between inquiry and care. One question that ties it all together, and it's the question we never know the answer to. It's what do you think? To ask that question of your students, and to listen deeply to their answer, and to take action based on what they say, is the profound link between inquiry and care, and that will move us forward to build better schools. Now that being said, you need to problematize everything, including everything I just said. The most important question you can ask is, what's the worst consequence of your best idea? This is a child using power tools in a school. If we didn't ask ourselves what's the worst consequence of having kids do that, we would have had a problem. I've got a great idea. Let's go one-to-one. Let's give every high school child a laptop. Nothing bad could happen, right? If we don't ask that question, we will be smacked in the face by every answer that comes up. And we will be the worst of what schools have been, just reactionary. And we'll put desks back in rows, we'll put textbooks back on the desk, because that never goes too long. Problematize your best ideas. Figure out what are the things that, even if it goes all the way right, you're still going to have to deal with it. The best thing about SLA, we've got really, really empowered kids. The worst thing about SLA, we have really, really empowered kids. That's part of the model. We have to teach for them. We have to know that even when we're at our best, that we will fight the battle between empowerment and inquiry. That being said, empower the kids. It is about them. This is their education. This is their learning. It's about them. And if anything I said to matter today, if anything I said, take it home. These ideas just can't live at conferences. Share them. This is, I think the secret to school reform in America is pizza. I'm serious. Open the doors to your school on a Saturday. Buy the pizza. Invite everybody, students, parents, community members, and ask them one simple question. What do you dream for your school? What do you dream for your children? And start there. And when you do all of this, understand that you will be forever changed. To me, it is the ultimate act of hubris. It is the ultimate act hubris, I just said that. To think we can transform the life of a child without being transformed ourselves. Let us start by changing ourselves. Let us know that the act of trying to be the adults that these kids need us to be is incredibly hard. I am not as good as the person that my students think I am. No one is. But I'm better for the effort. The attempt to be Mr. Lehmann. The attempt to be that person that my kids think I am. Being that good has made me closer to it than I was when I was a teacher. Never think you can transform the life of a child without being transformed yourself. Because at the end of the day, in an age where they have more at their disposal in their pockets than you have information in your head, we have to ask ourselves, what is the thing that we teach? It is the thing we have always taught. It is the most important thing we've always taught. We teach our children.